This is the KLIM Turbo Frost, and apparently it's a 16,000 RPM laptop cooling pad. But that's not really true. In fact, it's a total lie. But don't get me wrong, this is still an excellent cooler. Actually, one of the best that I've ever tested, so you're not going to want to miss this video. See, I've reviewed well over 25 different laptop coolers at this point, and I get asked by viewers all the time to take a look at new models when they're released. And when someone mentioned this cooler, I was very intrigued the second I looked it up. Because on the Amazon listing, it claims that this is a 16,000 RPM laptop cooling pad, which if that was true, would be absolutely insane. It's something I definitely wanted to take a look at. But it actually isn't, because if you look a little deeper on the listing, it's actually a 4-fan design that all run at 4,000 RPM, and KLIM is just adding them up. And at KLIM, if you happen to be watching this video, you don't get to add up the RPM of your fans. It doesn't work that way. There are a lot of coolers with a lot more fans running at higher speeds. They'd be claiming like 21,000 RPM or way higher than that. So just, yeah, fix it. Make sure people aren't getting confused, because that is very deceptive for most people. Besides my gripes with the marketing of this cooler, it's impressive. See, they copied the tried and true brute force design that IETS and Llano made famous by using a high-powered fan, or in this case, fans, to move as much air as possible through the actual bottom of your laptop, while preventing it from escaping by using a foam border. And I will say that compared to a lot of the other brands, I'm not a huge fan of the foam that they actually used. The feel of this one is a little soft to me compared to a lot of the other brands, which usually use a little more of a firmer design. And I think this may actually be limiting some of the performance. And I would love to actually test with the other border at some point, because I think it's adding a little extra air leakage compared to some others. Even though this cooler still held its own against the IETS and Llano, as you'll see in a little bit. But something that all brands include is actually the additional foam insert, which basically allows for 14-inch laptops, which I'm very happy that this cooler actually included, because I feel like those are often forgotten in the industry, and I'm super happy to see that. Beyond the foam and fans of this design, like a lot of other high-end laptop coolers, it's made of a pretty durable feeling plastic design that's wrapped in an RGB strip, which does actually look better than a lot of other brands, thanks to the fact that the RGB goes all the way around in this kind of 360 design, and because it's diffused, it looks really nice. There's also an included USB hub on the back, but one thing that a lot of brands don't do that this one does is that's actually a USB 3.0 hub, because a lot of other brands typically cheap out here. So that's pretty nice to see. And like a lot of other coolers in its class, it has a basically dedicated DC wall outlet for a separate 12-volt power. This is something that is kind of a limitation for most models, but what's unique about this one is that it also supports 5-volt over Type-C, making it a little more portable than some of the other models out there. But you will end up actually losing out on some of the max RPM range, as it will only go to about 3,300 RPM, so I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you absolutely need to take it on the go. And with it being as loud as it is, as you'll see, yeah, you're probably not going to want to take it with you everywhere. The design continues with the stand, which is another area I'm not a huge fan of, because it uses this cheap latching design that I normally see on coolers under $30. See, in pretty much any cooler above that uses nice firm feet, which feel a lot more secure. While we're looking at the stand, we can also take a look at the bottom, where we have a removable dust filter, which is a really nice little touch to see, and is super nice, especially as somebody who works on computers sees the amount of dust that gets inside of them. Yeah, this is super handy, especially with those fast fans. Speaking of something this cooler does do very well design-wise, is the actual interface. There are 5 buttons up front here that will have a nice, very tactile feeling. And the information is all read out on this nice, easy to read screen, where you can see the speed as well as the RGB mode that you're in. The fans inside of this design go from 1,500 to 4,000 RPM in increments of 500 RPM. A little less than some of the other brands that typically use smaller tuning, but in the case of most systems, it really doesn't matter when you're going from like 3,900 RPM to 4,000 RPM. It's probably unnoticeable, especially both your hearing and the performance. Yeah, it's probably identical, so don't really worry about that. Now with the design and build quality discussed, let's get into some actual performance, because the cooler might sound great, but until we actually test it, we can't draw any real conclusions. So as all my testing has been run over the past couple years, we're going to use my older Asus GL552, which is basically a really hot laptop that I've had for a long time, that's run hot for as long as I've had it. Starting off with the idle test, we found that the KLIM actually performed quite well, dropping CPU temps by about 19 degrees Celsius, putting it just a single degree behind the Llano V12, V10, and IETS GT600 V2. Great company. And the same result was also seen at idle with the GPU test, where we found it sitting around 27.7 degrees Celsius. When it came to actual stress tests, starting with AIDA64, the cooler also did really well, just sitting behind some of the top coolers from IETS and Llano, with a very respectable 12 degrees Celsius drop in average temperature. And the GPU stress test, we saw the exact same trend also continued, which is awesome to see. Basically, it was just sitting behind the V12 from Llano, the IETS GT600V2, and GT500V2, which is a really great spot to be in and is right where you want to be for a cooler at this price point. And I'll get to that in just a minute. Now let's see how this actually translates to real world performance. To do this, we actually ran a test using PC Mark 10 and Performance Test 11, where I found the cooler did an amazing job maximizing boost clocks, allowing my top PC Mark 10 score ever on this particular laptop, and right up in the top contention when it came to the rest of the pack for Performance Test 11. Very impressive. So now why did I say this cooler was nearly perfect or one of the best I've ever seen? Well, since my FlyDigi review, I now added a second laptop with plenty of bottom ventilation to basically test these high-end laptop coolers. Because I realized this Asus laptop isn't the best one overall for the really high performance stuff. The one we'll be using today is my Lenovo Legion Pro 5 16IRX8. And compared to the top end of the market, we found that this cooler basically tied the Llano V10 in a very impressive 3 degrees cooler than the closest model and a 19 degree improvement at idle compared to the stock setup. And the GPU cooling was even better. At idle, we saw almost a 20 degree improvement compared to the stock setup, and it was just behind the Llano V10. These results also carried over into our stress test, where we saw that this cooler only peaked at 89 degrees Celsius and it averaged at just 76 degrees Celsius. That's a 19 degrees cooler under load, which is very impressive for a laptop that has a 13700HX, which is a very hot CPU. The GPU temp when running FurMark was also top scorer here, sitting at a 21 degrees cooler than the actual stock configuration. This translated into the best scores I've ever gotten in both PC Mark 10 and Performance Test 11. As it increased our PC Mark score by 8.3%, which is sweet. Plus the laptop isn't overheating anymore, giving the system a better chance to actually live longer. These results were very impressive and honestly shocked me because I didn't think a brand outside of Llano or IETS really would be able to compete in the top of the market like this one actually did. So I'm all here for the competition. However, there are some downsides with these high performance coolers that a lot of people have a hard time getting over. Basically, the main one is noise, because this thing is really loud. But it's actually better than a lot of the other top-end laptop coolers, as I measured it at just 64 decibels. Which, don't get me wrong, is absolutely annoying, but they absolutely can be drowned out by some nice headphones. Plus, this cooler doesn't have the worst sounding fans I've ever heard, but don't take my word for it, go ahead and take a listen. So as you just heard, the KLIM Turbo Frost is definitely loud, but it's actually better than most other coolers both in this class, noise-wise, and when it comes to performance. Like, I didn't expect this level of performance, especially when I saw the ridiculous marketing claims they were making to try to sell this thing. But aside from that, I think this is an awesome little cooler. So do I recommend it at the current $100 price? It is expensive, but it's a little cheaper than some of the top of the line competition. So absolutely, it's a great cooler with great performance. But if you do want something maybe built a little bit better, but about the same performance, take a look at the Llano or IETS options. They're typically a little more expensive, but they're built a little bit better, and I don't think you can go wrong with any of those. And if you want something cheap, go ahead and buy the KLIM or Lines 2 fan coolers. I've talked about those for years, and at $12, they're kind of hard to go wrong with. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like, subscribe for more content like this, and if there's any other coolers you want me to take a look at, let me know in the comments down below. Before you go, take a look at this video here where we built our own laptop cooler. It was one of the coolest projects I've ever done. I think you'll absolutely love it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.